20 things from the 1960s kids today will never understand. What if everything you loved about childhood just vanished? Back in the 1960s, life moved slower, felt warmer, and the little things mattered most. It was a world built on charm and simplicity. Let's take a heartfelt look at 20 things kids today may never truly understand. Playing records. Do you remember the quiet magic of lowering the needle onto a spinning vinyl just before that soft crackle gave way to melody? In the 1960s, playing a record wasn't simply about hearing music. It was about feeling it. It was a small ceremony, a private moment where sound met soul. You didn't just press a button. You chose the speed, 33, 45, or 78 revolutions per minute, each like a secret key unlocking a different rhythm of the past. The 30s carried full albums, long and thoughtful. The 45s spun quicker, offering radio hits and teenage anthems. And then there were the 78s, those thick, delicate discs with voices from a bygone era, like whispers from your grandparents' youth. Each record held its own time capsule, and the turntable was the vessel that brought it to life. There was something tender in the way we handled those records, wiping them gently, placing them with care, adjusting the speed like tuning into a memory. The music didn't just play. It filled the room, wrapped around us like a warm blanket on a Sunday afternoon. And in those spinning grooves, we found joy, comfort, and pieces of ourselves we didn't know we'd been missing. Pull-tab soda cans. There was a time when the simple sound of a soda can popping open meant something more. In the early 1960s, aluminum cans came with pull tabs, small detachable rings that made opening a soft drink feel almost futuristic. You'd yank the tab, hear that crisp hiss, and take a sip of something cold and sweet under the summer sun. But for all their convenience, those pull tabs came with a cost. Once removed, they had nowhere to go but the ground. Beaches, sidewalks, and picnic lawns slowly filled with these tiny metallic crescents. They glinted in the grass, littered park benches, and even ended up inside the cans themselves. Some kids dropped the tab in and drank around it, a risky habit that sometimes ended in a cut lip. As the environmental movement gained traction in the late 60s and early 70s, people began to question the trail of waste left behind. Designers and engineers took note, and eventually, the Stay Tab was born. An invention that kept the lid intact, solved the litter issue, and reshaped how we enjoy our favorite fizzy drinks. Next time you crack open a can and the tab stays put, you're holding a small piece of progress, born from a lesson learned in a simpler time. Telephone party lines. Back in the days when rotary phones sat proudly on hallway tables and cords stretched across kitchens, the idea of privacy on a phone call was more of a hope than a guarantee. In many parts of America, especially in small towns and rural communities, families shared what was known as a party line. One phone line connected multiple households, each with its own distinct ring pattern to let you know when a call was meant for you. But even if it wasn't your ring, the temptation to quietly lift the receiver and listen in was always there. Some did it out of habit, others out of sheer boredom. After all, a neighbor's conversation often carried more intrigue than the daily paper. Despite the obvious lack of privacy, these shared lines connected people in unexpected ways. They spread news quickly, offered comfort during emergencies, and served as a strange but effective form of community bulletin board. Over time, as individual phone lines became more accessible and affordable, party lines faded into history. Still, for those who remember the faint click of another phone joining the call, the party line wasn't just about communication. It was about closeness, curiosity, and the rhythm of daily life shared across wires. Soda fountains. Nothing tasted quite like a fizzy soda poured fresh into a tall glass, the syrup a little too sweet, the moment just right. In the 1960s, Soda fountains weren't merely stops for refreshment. They were warm, humming heartbeats of small-town life. Set inside cozy drugstores or glowing diners, these chrome-trimmed counters became gathering places where time seemed to slow, if only for a while. Behind the counter, the soda jerk moved with practiced rhythm, layering syrups, cherry, vanilla, chocolate, with a splash of sparkle and a touch of flair. Each glass was made by hand, a little performance in itself. But more than the drinks, it was the togetherness that made these spots special. School friends huddled over shared floats, first dates dared to hold hands under the counter, and neighbors traded stories between sips and smiles. The air always felt lighter there, filled with jukebox tunes, the soft clink of ice, and the unspoken comfort of community. As the decades passed and coffee chains replaced corner counters, the soda fountain slowly slipped into memory. Yet, for those who lived it, that world remains. A syrup-sweet slice of Americana, where laughter echoed off tile floors and every straw held a little bit of magic. What's one simple moment from your childhood that you wish you could relive? Just once more? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. TV shows signing off at night. Do you remember the soft hum of the television as the screen faded to black and the world seemed to exhale? Back in the 1960s, when the night grew still and the final program wrapped, TV stations didn't just roll into another show. They said goodnight. The broadcast day had a beginning and an end, like a storybook gently closing. I still recall sitting cross-legged on the living room carpet, the glow of the screen warming my face, waiting for the last notes of the national anthem to drift through the room. My father would reach for the dial, and in that quiet moment, somewhere between static and silence, we knew it was time for bed. It felt like the world itself was tucking us in. Television then wasn't an endless loop of noise and content. It had rhythm. It had pause. When stations signed off, it was a gentle reminder that even machines needed rest, and so did we. A simple test pattern or waving flag told the whole country, "The day is done, we'll see you tomorrow." Today, with screens that never sleep and shows that never stop, that quiet farewell has vanished. But for many of us, its echo still lingers in the hush of late-night memory. Sunday drives. The soft hum of rubber on pavement, the sun drifting low behind the trees, and a breeze sneaking through a half-cracked window. That was the soundtrack of a Sunday afternoon. In the 1960s, when gasoline was cheap and the open road still felt like an invitation, families didn't need a grand plan to make memories. They just needed each other, a full tank, and time to wander. Fathers behind the wheel with one arm out the window, mothers flipping through road maps or handing out sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, and children in the back seat counting cows or spotting cloud shapes. It was a slow, sweet kind of magic. The road curved like a ribbon through golden fields and sleepy towns, each mile bringing conversation, laughter, or the quiet comfort of simply being together. Sometimes the destination was a lakeside picnic. Other times, it was a drive-in theater glowing against the dusk, where headlights dimmed and fireflies danced above the grass. And sometimes, there was no destination at all, just the joy of motion, of going somewhere, anywhere, together. Before the world sped up, the Sunday drive reminded us that beauty lived in stillness, and love could be measured in miles without end. Writing letters. What happens to the heart when the only way to reach someone is through ink, paper, and patience? Long before instant messages lit up screens and conversations danced across satellites, we reached for a pen. In the 1960s, writing letters wasn't just how people stayed in touch, it was how they stayed close. A sheet of lined paper became a canvas for stories, confessions, jokes, and longing. Every word mattered because every word was felt. Young sweethearts poured their hearts into cursive lines, folding each letter like a secret and sealing it with hope. Friends wrote about school dances, summer jobs, and faraway dreams. Parents sent news across states. Children scribbled thank you notes to grandparents. The process was deliberate, choosing the right stationery, smoothing the envelope, licking the stamp, and dropping it into a blue mailbox with a kind of reverence. Then came the waiting. Not anxious, but tender. Days passed, sometimes weeks, until the mailbox offered something real, paper touched by someone else's hands. Letter writing taught us how to speak with care, to listen across distance, and to slow down enough to mean what we said. It wasn't just communication, it was connection, quiet, enduring, and sealed with love. A conversation that took its time and was better for it. Using encyclopedias for research. Thick books lined the shelves like silent guardians of knowledge, each one heavy with facts, history, and the wonders of the world. In the 1960s, when a kid had a question about the moon landing, volcanoes, or how airplanes stayed in the sky, they didn't turn to a search bar. They reached for the encyclopedia. These weren't just books. They were tomes, glossy pages filled with charts, black and white photographs, and tightly packed columns of text. You'd flip carefully, finger tracing the alphabet tabs, hoping to land on the right page without missing a single juicy detail. Sometimes, one topic led to another, and you'd end up spending an hour reading about something completely unrelated but endlessly fascinating. Every family that valued learning proudly displayed their encyclopedia set, often gifted or bought on installment from a door-to-door salesman. In schools, the reference section held them like treasure, and students leaned over desks, scribbling notes and copying diagrams with pencils chewed from focus. It took effort, real effort, to find the answers back then. But in that effort was something special, a deeper connection to learning, and the slow-building excitement of discovery. Long before digital shortcuts, encyclopedias gave us the thrill of the search itself. Cigarette advertising. What lingers longer? Smoke in the air, or memories of a time when it was everywhere? In the 1960s, cigarette ads were stitched into the fabric of American life. You saw them between your favorite sitcoms, heard them crackle through the car radio, and watched as silver-tongued announcers painted smoking as suave, sophisticated, even healthy. Celebrities lit up on screen without a second thought. Cowboys, doctors, housewives, each one holding a cigarette like it was a symbol of success or escape. Tobacco companies poured millions into these campaigns, crafting messages that danced just shy of the truth. Filtered, low tar, light. Each new buzzword was designed to ease concern, even as medical research began pointing to a far grimmer reality. As awareness of smoking's deadly effects grew, so did the tension between truth and advertising. By the close of the decade, science could no longer be brushed aside. The link between smoking and serious illness was undeniable. In 1971, the U.S. government stepped in, banning cigarette commercials from radio and television, a decision that reshaped advertising and public health forever. Today, those smoky jingles are gone, but their echoes remain, a reminder of how easily charm can cloud truth and how long it can take a nation to clear the air. The milkman's daily delivery. Some mornings just smelled like milk and grass clippings. In the early hours, before the world got noisy, the milkman would glide down our street in his white truck like a dairy-fed ghost. His footsteps were soft, but that familiar clink of glass bottles landing on the porch, that was the true wake-up call. As a kid, I used to race my sister to the front door just to be the first to grab the frosty bottles, still beaded with dew and snug in their wire crate. If we were lucky, he'd left chocolate milk too, and that was cause for celebration or sibling squabbles. It wasn't just about convenience, it was about consistency. Rain or shine, weekday or weekend, that bottle would be there, loyal as the sunrise. Each home had its milk box by the door or on the stoop, and neighbors often swapped stories beside them like it was the town square. The bottles were thick, heavy, and meant to be reused, long before recycling bins and eco-trends made headlines. Today, the Milkman is mostly a memory, but for many of us, those quiet deliveries remain a symbol of a slower, steadier world, where trust came in glass, and mornings began with a clink. If this video brought back some warm memories, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more trips down memory lane. Phone numbers with named exchanges. In a time when neighborhoods felt like extended family and voices traveled through copper lines, phone numbers spoke a language of their own. Before the age of area codes and endless digits, people dialed names, two-letter prefixes that brought familiarity and charm to every call. From the 1930s to the early 1960s, numbers often began with words like Cherry, Plaza, or Rockwell, each one rooted in a local exchange that reflected where you lived. These weren't just functional codes, they were cultural landmarks. If someone gave you their number and said Elmwood 5, you immediately had a sense of their part of town. For my uncle, it was Granite 3, and for years, he refused to call it anything else. The letters weren't decoration, they were practical too, each one corresponding to a number on the rotary dial. Kids learned them early, and operators used them daily, weaving a sense of identity into every digit. When the switch came to an all-number system, it felt like losing something quietly precious. The names disappeared, and the phone became just another machine. But for those who remember, those exchanges added texture to communication, proof that even a phone number once upon a time could feel like a neighbor calling from just around the corner. Carbon paper. Isn't it strange how something so simple could feel so essential? Before photocopiers became a fixture in every office and classroom, we had carbon paper, a thin, inky sheet that worked quietly behind the scenes to help us make exact duplicates by hand. It didn't beep, didn't need electricity, and yet it got the job done with quiet precision and a bit of smudged charm. To make a copy, you'd sandwich the carbon paper between your original and a blank sheet, then write or type on top. The pressure transferred the writing below, leaving you with an instant twin, perfect for receipts, forms, or those old school permission slips. Every mark mattered, and every word appeared twice, without a second thought. Offices used it daily. Parents kept a stash in the kitchen drawer. Kids sometimes played with it just to see their handwriting magically duplicated. It could be messy. Fingers often came away stained in smears of purple or blue. But that was part of its charm. Though it's faded from everyday life, carbon paper reminds us of a time when copying something meant slowing down, pressing with care, and trusting a little sheet of ink to carry your words forward, one impression at a time. Adding machines with paper rolls. The steady clatter of number keys and the whir of paper rolls once echoed through office walls like a heartbeat of productivity. In the 1960s, before the digital age swept in with sleek screens and error-free editing, adding machines were the trusted tools of accountants, clerks, and anyone dealing with rows of figures. These machines weren't flashy. They were boxy, heavy, and built for one job: crunching numbers. With each tap of the keys, digits imprinted themselves onto a narrow strip of paper, slowly unspooling like a silent witness to every calculation. That printed tape didn't just serve as a record. It was your safety net, your audit trail, your memory. Mistakes couldn't be erased with a button. If an error slipped in, the entire line had to be redone, from the top. It demanded patience, focus, and a sharp pencil nearby for backup notes. Still, despite their clunkiness, adding machines brought structure to the workday. The sound alone, a rhythmic mix of clicks, punches, and paper tearing, became the soundtrack of offices across the country. Though they've long been replaced by quiet software and glowing screens, those mechanical companions once defined the very pace of business, one printed total at a time. Using maps and printed directions. How did we manage to explore so far with nothing but paper maps and a bit of blind faith? Back in the 1960s and well into the decades after, navigating the world required attention, planning, and a little creativity. Families kept road atlases in the glove compartment, pages softened by time and use. Directions were handwritten or printed from travel services, sometimes scribbled on napkins, and often relied on landmarks more than street names. It wasn't just for long trips either. One summer afternoon, my friends and I set out to find a hidden fishing spot someone had mentioned. We tore a page from a phone book map, circled a bend in the river, and stuffed it into a backpack between peanut butter sandwiches. The map didn't get us all the way there. We took a few wrong turns and ended up cutting through a soybean field. But that made arriving feel like a triumph. People trusted their eyes, paid attention to road signs, and weren't afraid to stop and ask for help. The journey was part of the experience, not something to be rushed through. Today, with every destination a blue dot away, we've lost a little of that wonder, the kind that lived in every unfolded map and unexpected detour. Announcements during cartoons. Cartoons in the 1960s didn't just bring laughs. They also snuck in a little wisdom between the giggles and Saturday morning cereal. Right in the middle of rocket-powered rabbits and talking bears, a familiar voice might suddenly pop up with something unexpected. A lesson. Not from a teacher, but from the TV itself. Public service announcements were woven into commercial breaks like tiny moments of grown-up advice wearing kid-friendly costumes. They were colorful, catchy, and just serious enough to make you stop chewing your cereal mid-bite. Characters like Smokey Bear reminded kids, with that unmistakable gravelly voice, that only they could prevent forest fires. Others talked about littering, kindness, safety, or standing up for what's right. What made them work was how seamlessly they fit into the cartoon universe. They didn't feel like lectures. They felt like a friend tapping you on the shoulder and saying, "Hey, this matters." And somehow, it stuck. Kids walked away knowing not just how to laugh at falling anvils, but how to care about the world around them. Those quirky, heartfelt segments helped shape a generation, planting seeds of responsibility, one animated frame at a time. In their own quiet way, they made Saturday mornings matter a little bit more. Which memory from the video felt the most nostalgic to you? We'd love to hear your story. Collecting green stamps. What if every trip to the grocery store came with a secret reward, one you could see, touch, and trade for treasure? Back in the 1960s, collecting green stamps turned everyday shopping into something far more exciting. These weren't postage stamps, nor were they decorative. They were tiny squares of promise, handed out by gas stations, supermarkets, and department stores. For every dollar spent, you earned a few stamps, and with enough filled pages, you could turn them in for real goods. From toasters to bicycles, blenders to picnic sets. Each family had their own stamp booklet, often tucked in a kitchen drawer or clipped to the fridge. Kids helped lick and stick them in straight lines, dreaming about what reward might come next. There was something joyful and strangely satisfying about flipping through the filled pages, each one bringing you closer to a prize that felt earned. Unlike today's invisible digital rewards, green stamps were tangible. You could run your fingers across them, see your progress grow, and imagine the final payoff. It wasn't just about what you got. It was the anticipation, the participation, and the shared excitement that turned a simple shopping routine into a small, memorable adventure. A true family affair, one stamp at a time. Manual typewriter ribbon. Keys tapped with purpose, striking ink into paper with each decisive motion. In the 1960s, the manual typewriter was more than just office equipment. It was a partner in every letter, every draft, every page of hard-earned thought. At the center of it all was the typewriter ribbon, a thin black strip holding every word waiting to be written. This little ribbon wasn't flashy, but it mattered. It carried the ink that made every sentence visible, turning ideas into something permanent. But ribbons didn't last forever. They wore out, faded, and sometimes tangled when you least expected. Swapping one out meant lifting the hood of the machine, threading it through spools, and hoping you didn't end up with inky fingerprints on your cuffs. Still, the process was oddly satisfying. You could tell a ribbon was nearing its end by the way the letters looked pale, ghostly on the page. Changing it required care and a bit of respect for the craft. Unlike today's smooth, silent keyboards, using a typewriter meant feeling every sentence take shape, and the ribbon, messy, fussy, essential, was a reminder that writing was once a hands-on act of precision, persistence, and a little bit of ink-stained magic. Film strip projectors. I can still picture the soft hum of the projector and the gentle click as the next frame slid into place. In classrooms across America during the 1960s, the film strip projector was a quiet star of the school day, a bridge between chalkboards and imagination. These machines weren't flashy, but they had a certain magic. Long strips of still images were fed through by hand, one frame at a time, each glowing softly on the pull-down screen at the front of the room. Sometimes the lights were dimmed, giving the lesson a cozy, almost cinematic feel. Subjects ranged from the Revolutionary War to photosynthesis, and every picture came with a pause for the teacher's voice, explaining, elaborating, or asking questions to keep young minds engaged. You could hear the creak of chairs, the scratch of pencils, and the occasional shuffle of restless feet. But when the lights dimmed and the projector started rolling, it felt like the room leaned in together. For all its simplicity, it was cutting edge back then, a new way to learn through images, rhythm, and shared attention. Looking back, those clunky projectors weren't just educational tools. They were moments of focus, of calm, of quiet wonder, where learning unfolded one frame at a time. Using a hose to wash the driveway. Was there ever a more satisfying weekend chore than spraying down the driveway on a warm afternoon? In the 1960s, it was almost a suburban tradition, dragging out the hose, twisting the nozzle, and letting a strong stream of water sweep away the week's dust, leaves, and scattered memories. It wasn't just about cleanliness. It was a kind of quiet ritual of care, a moment when homeowners took pride in the little things, like seeing concrete go from dull gray to fresh and glistening in the sun. Kids would sometimes join in, darting barefoot through the spray or drawing smiley faces with the water on hot pavement. The task itself felt simple and satisfying, as natural as mowing the lawn or watering the flower beds. Few gave a second thought to where the water went or how much was used. But as years passed, so did awareness. What once felt harmless began to raise eyebrows, especially as conversations around conservation grew louder. Today, using a hose just for driveway cleaning is often frowned upon. Push brooms, pressure washers, and water-wise habits have replaced that carefree flow. Still, those moments remain etched in memory. Sunlight dancing off the mist, the smell of warm concrete, and the sound of a hose hissing gently in the summer breeze. The Pogo Stick. Beneath the bright summer sun, you could hear it. A rhythmic boing, followed by laughter and the occasional thud as someone toppled over in the grass. In the 1960s, the Pogo Stick wasn't just a toy. It was a badge of honor, a test of balance, grit, and pure childhood joy. Made of a sturdy metal pole, a pair of footrests, and a coiled spring tucked inside its base, The Pogo Stick was deceptively simple. But once you stepped on and gripped those rubber handles, it became a wild, bouncing adventure. Kids across neighborhoods spent entire afternoons perfecting their technique, counting jumps, comparing tricks, and daring each other to bounce just a little higher than before. What made the Pogo Stick so special wasn't just its novelty. It was the thrill of mastering something physical, something you could feel in your knees and calves after a long day outside. It taught patience, persistence, and the value of falling and getting right back up. Long before screens and digital scores, joy lived in the creak of a spring and the challenge of staying upright. The Pogo Stick didn't beep or flash. It rewarded only effort, turning sidewalks into playgrounds and simple moments into lifelong memories. This meant you were rich in the 1960s. If your family had even one of these things in the 1960s, chances are the neighbors thought you were loaded. Back then, wealth didn't always mean mansions or yachts. It showed up in everyday luxuries that made jaws drop. Today, we're taking a look at the subtle but powerful signs that meant you were living large in the 60s. 2 cars in the driveway. Remember when the real American dream was having one car for the family and another just to show off in the driveway? In the 1960s, that second car wasn't just a mode of transportation. It was a badge of honor. While the average household managed just fine with a single vehicle, having 2 meant you were a step above. It told the world you had some financial breathing room, and maybe even a few luxuries tucked into your lifestyle. I once heard about a neighborhood kid who'd brag that his mom had her own car. And the rest of us? We'd just stare, awestruck, like he lived in a mansion. And if one of those cars was a Cadillac, that wasn't just wealth, that was prestige wrapped in chrome. Back then, Cadillacs were the pinnacle, smooth rides with tail fins that looked like they belonged in a parade. But beyond the flash, 2 cars meant independence. Mom didn't have to wait for Dad to get home just to make a grocery run. She had keys of her own, and that changed the rhythm of daily life. In a world where ownership still felt rare, 2 cars said, "We've made it." Flying on airplanes for vacation. There was a time when stepping onto an airplane felt like entering another world, one filled with pressed suits, polished smiles, and a quiet sense of prestige. In the 1960s, flying wasn't just about getting from point A to point B. It was an event, a privilege, and for most, a dream just out of reach. Families who vacationed by plane were seen as having truly made it because commercial air travel was far from common. While the average American family packed up the station wagon for a long, dusty drive, those with money-boarded sleek jets that soared above the clouds, heading for destinations like Disneyland in California or the sunny beaches of Miami. Airline tickets cost more than most could justify, and that price tag alone made flying a rare luxury. Even the airports had an air of glamour, with travelers dressed in their Sunday best. Everything, from the stewardess uniforms to the in-flight meals served on real trays, whispered sophistication. To fly for leisure back then wasn't just a mode of travel. It was a declaration. You belonged to a different tier of life. And for those who did, the sky wasn't the limit. It was just the beginning. Private bedroom for each child. If you grew up in the 1960s and didn't have to share a bedroom, congratulations. You basically had the kid version of a penthouse suite. Back then, most families packed 2, sometimes 3 kids into a single room like sardines, in bunk beds. So, when a child had 4 walls and a door all to themselves, it wasn't just a room. It was a revelation. It hinted at something more than just floor space. It meant the family had the means to afford a larger home, possibly one with that extra bedroom that wasn't being used as a sewing room or a storage closet. For the lucky few, that room became a sanctuary. Kids would pick out paint swatches from the Sears catalog, or beg for Snoopy wallpaper, adding their own little touches of personality. And with that came a rare sense of ownership, of space, privacy, and a bit of independence. In a time when square footage was sacred and privacy was a luxury, having your own room didn't just feel special. It felt like you'd earned your place in the world. It was your first real taste of freedom, and it mattered more than most people remember. American Express card. What if the simple act of paying for dinner could instantly tell the world you'd arrived? In the 1960s, flashing an American Express card was like putting a spotlight on your social standing. It wasn't just a piece of plastic, it was a quiet, gleaming badge of distinction. Back then, credit cards weren't common in everyday life. Most people paid with cash or checks, and only a select few carried a charge card, let alone one as exclusive as American Express. The company intentionally marketed to the upper crust, setting higher fees and limiting approvals, which only added to the mystique. Using one at a fine restaurant or hotel made an impression. People noticed. And when Amex introduced the Gold Card in the mid-60s, it wasn't just about convenience anymore. It was about image, lifestyle, and access. It meant you traveled, dined in style, and moved in circles where luxury was the norm. In an era where financial privacy was prized and indulgence was rarely flaunted, simply having that card in your wallet whispered, "I've made it," without needing to say a word. Did your family own any of these things back in the 60s? If so, which one made you feel the proudest? 2 living rooms. There was a quiet kind of prestige in walking into a home and realizing it had not just one, but 2 living rooms. In those days, most families were lucky to have a single gathering space. But when a second room existed solely for show, you knew you'd stepped into a different class of living. The formal living room was rarely touched, its furniture often wrapped in thick plastic that crinkled when you sat down, if you were even allowed to. Curtains stayed drawn to protect the upholstery, and not a single cushion was out of place. It wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about presentation, legacy, and social standing. The other living room, the real one, was where life happened. Homework, television, laughter after dinner. But that untouched room, that was reserved for guests and special occasions, a symbol of control and grace in a world that was often anything but. Having that extra space meant something back then. It told your neighbors you valued beauty, you hosted with pride, and more than anything else, you had the means to separate function from form. And that said a lot. Color TV, especially more than one. Few household upgrades in the 1960s sparked more envy or admiration than the arrival of a color television. For families who managed to bring one home, it was more than just a box with moving pictures. It was a glowing badge of modern success. While most living rooms still revolved around grainy black and white sets, color TV brought the world to life in rich, saturated hues that felt almost magical. Shows like Bonanza or The Wonderful World of Disney didn't just entertain, they dazzled. And if someone owned more than one TV, that wasn't convenience. It was a quiet declaration of serious wealth. These sets weren't cheap. In fact, in the early 60s, a color television could easily cost hundreds of dollars, several weeks or even months of pay for the average worker. Not everyone could justify it, but those who could often became the center of attention. Neighbors would gather for special broadcasts, peeking into a future they couldn't yet afford. In those days, a color TV didn't just change how you watched, it changed how others saw you. Having a dishwasher. Back in the 1960s, if you had a dishwasher in your kitchen, people didn't just think you were lucky, they figured you were living the high life. In a decade when most families still tackled dirty dishes by hand, often, after every single meal, owning a machine that did it for you felt downright futuristic. Dishwashers weren't just practical, they were a statement. They gleamed under the kitchen light like a chrome trophy, whispering to every guest that this household could afford both time and technology. And they weren't cheap either. At a time when average folks prioritized essentials over luxuries, investing in a dishwasher meant you had extra room in the budget. Relatives would bring it up in conversation, neighbors might sneak a peek, and suddenly, your kitchen became something of a modern marvel. It was the era when appliances started representing success, and the dishwasher sat at the top of that list. Even the ads back then sold it as a dream come true for the American housewife. In a world without microwaves or smart gadgets, that hum of automation was pure magic. 2 bathrooms. What did it mean when a family in the 60s had not 1 but 2 bathrooms? Well, to put it simply, it meant they were doing something right. Most homes built before or just after the war came with a single bathroom, and that one got a workout. I still remember standing in line outside ours as a kid, clutching my lunchbox, trying not to be late while my sister took her sweet time fixing her bangs in the mirror. So when a friend casually mentioned their house had a guest bathroom, I couldn't even picture it. A second bathroom felt almost excessive, like having a refrigerator just for soda. But it wasn't just about comfort. Adding or buying a home with 2 meant real money had been spent, and not everyone could swing that. It signaled financial breathing room, a touch of modern convenience in a time when space and plumbing weren't taken for granted. For parents, it meant privacy. For kids, it meant fewer morning meltdowns. And for everyone else, it quietly said, "This family's got it figured out." Back then, an extra bathroom wasn't just about plumbing. It was a marker of prosperity you didn't have to show off. It showed itself. Central air conditioning. Stepping into a home chilled by central air in the 1960s felt like walking into the future. While most families sweated through the summer with box fans in the window or rattling AC units that barely cooled one room, central air whispered something different: comfort, modernity, and quiet wealth. It wasn't just about beating the heat. It was about living in a house that felt polished and ahead of its time. I still remember the first time I visited a neighbor's home with central air. The air felt cooler, yes, but the house somehow seemed more elegant, more put together, and people noticed. Whenever the HVAC work trucks pulled into a driveway, whispers would ripple down the block. "They must have come into some money," someone would say. Because make no mistake, central air was a serious investment. Not just the installation, which wasn't cheap, but the electric bills that came after. Only families with a steady income and some breathing room in the budget could swing it. And for those who could, their homes became a quiet symbol of success. At a time when luxury was subtle and status wasn't always spoken aloud, cool air on a hot day said more than words ever could. Flocked Christmas tree. All it took was a dusting of artificial snow to turn an ordinary Christmas tree into a suburban spectacle. In the 1960s, a flocked tree, white, fluffy, and sparkling like it had just come down from the North Pole, wasn't something you picked up on a whim. It cost extra, and you could bet your neighbors noticed. My family couldn't afford one, but every year we'd drive past the Wilsons' house just to admire theirs. It stood in their front window like a department store display, decked out in silver tinsel, color-coordinated ornaments, and bubble lights that danced like tiny lava lamps. Mrs. Wilson told my mom it had been professionally flocked at the garden center and came wrapped in plastic to protect it until decorating day. That little detail? Pure luxury. Most families had to settle for a basic green tree with a few handmade ornaments, but a flocked one meant you had a little extra cash and a whole lot of pride in presentation. It was a symbol of taste and trendiness, and just rare enough to feel exclusive. In a season all about warmth and wonder, that snowy white tree gave off a cool kind of glow you couldn't miss. Riding lawnmower. Ever see someone riding their lawnmower like it was a Cadillac? In the 1960s, that wasn't just grass cutting, it was status on display. At a time when most families pushed a rattling mower across their modest yard in the blazing sun, the sight of a neighbor smoothly cruising behind the wheel of a riding mower was enough to stop you mid-sip of lemonade. These machines weren't cheap. Brands like John Deere and International Harvester sold models that cost hundreds of dollars, a hefty sum for the average household. But the investment wasn't just about convenience, it was about image. A perfect lawn had become a modern-day badge of honor in the growing suburbs, and the riding mower was its crown jewel. I still remember the Andersons down the block. Mr. Anderson would mow in pressed khakis, waving like he was in a parade. The grass always looked like it belonged on a golf course. Some families even skipped the chore entirely and hired gardeners, which was practically unheard of back then. Whether you were behind the wheel or paid someone else to steer it, a lush, symmetrical lawn wasn't just about pride. It was proof that your family had arrived. In-ground swimming pool. By the mid-1960s, nothing said you'd made it, quite like stepping into your own backyard and diving into a sunlit in-ground pool. While most families were cooling off with a garden hose or piling into the car for a trip to the local public pool, those lucky few with crystal-clear water shimmering just beyond the patio were living in a different reality. These pools weren't just expensive to install, they came with ongoing maintenance, higher utility bills, and plenty of responsibility. But for the families who could afford one, it was all worth it. I remember going to the Pattersons' house 2 streets over. Their pool had underwater lights, a diving board, and even a small tiki bar setup where the grown-ups sipped iced tea that probably wasn't just tea. Cookouts turned into pool parties, and suddenly, they were the center of the neighborhood every summer. It wasn't just fun, it was flair. Above-ground pools were fine, but an in-ground pool? That was elegance poured in concrete. In a decade when leisure itself was a luxury, having a private oasis at home was more than convenience. It was a quiet, glistening badge of success. Having a housekeeper. If your mom didn't have to mop the floors while balancing a roast in the oven and yelling at you to set the table, you might have had a housekeeper. In the 1960s, hiring someone to clean your home was more than just convenient. It was a glowing neon sign that your family had a little extra cushion in the budget. Most folks managed their households on one income, which meant every dish scrubbed and floor swept was a badge of honor. But the families who brought in outside help, they were playing in a different league. I remember visiting a friend's house where the windows gleamed. The carpets held those fresh vacuum lines, and not a speck of dust dared settle on the coffee table. Their housekeeper wore a pressed uniform and called my friend's mother, ma'am. I thought I had stepped into a hotel. It wasn't just the cleanliness, it was the order, the elegance, the sense that someone had time to fluff pillows just right. And in an era where appearances mattered and company often dropped by unannounced, a tidy home wasn't just impressive, it was a social statement. Having a housekeeper meant your family had arrived. Quietly, but unmistakably. Were there any other status symbols in the 1960s that we didn't mention in the video? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Owning a yacht or recreational boat. What was the ultimate flex in the 1960s? Owning your own boat, and not just a rowboat or a dinghy, but a real recreational cruiser, maybe even a small yacht with a name painted across the stern and polished chrome railings that gleamed in the sun. Back then, boating wasn't a casual hobby, it was a luxury lifestyle. Most working-class families spent weekends mowing the lawn or fixing up the garage. But if you had a vessel sitting in a slip at the marina, that meant you'd climbed a different kind of ladder. I still remember the summer a neighbor rolled through town towing a sleek Chris Craft behind his Cadillac. The whole block came out to stare. The smell of varnished wood and the sound of the engine idling felt like something out of a Hollywood movie. Boats weren't just expensive to buy, They came with maintenance, fuel, docking fees, and insurance. That's why only the well-to-do could afford one. Even chartering a yacht for a weekend was reserved for the upper crust. In a time when success wasn't flaunted so openly, pulling away from the dock with sunglasses on and the wind in your hair said everything, without saying a word. Sending children to private school. Nothing turned more heads at the bus stop than a kid in a pressed blazer carrying a leather satchel, especially when the rest of us were in scuffed sneakers and hand-me-down jeans. In the 1960s, sending your child to private school wasn't just about better education. It was a bold, unmistakable display of wealth and aspiration. Most families relied on public schools, which were decent but crowded. Private schools, on the other hand, came with uniforms, Latin classes, and tuition fees that made your neighbors blink. I remember one boy in our neighborhood who attended a prep academy an hour away. His dad drove a Buick Riviera, his lunches came wrapped in waxed butcher paper, and his shoes always shined like they were polished by angels. It wasn't just about reading and arithmetic, it was a lifestyle. These schools offered connections, discipline, and a polished image that lasted well beyond graduation. And while the average household was pinching pennies, these families were writing checks for enrollment and proudly framing acceptance letters to Ivy League feeder schools. Back then, private education wasn't just a parental choice. It was a powerful signal that your family had the means, the values, and the vision to rise above the rest. Owning a vacation home. What kind of family had 2 refrigerators, one for home and one for the lake? The kind that owned a vacation home in the 1960s. And let me tell you, that was no small feat. Back then, most folks were focused on paying off their one and only mortgage. But for the fortunate few who could swing a second property, it was the ultimate sign that they'd made it. Whether it was a cottage near Cape Cod, a cabin in the Adirondacks, or a cozy hideaway in the Smokies, a vacation home wasn't just a luxury. It was a declaration. I knew a kid whose family had one near Lake Geneva. Every Monday, he'd come back with mosquito bites, Polaroids of sunsets, and stories about boating and campfires that made the rest of us green with envy. But owning a second home meant more than weekend escapes. It meant paying for upkeep, furniture, travel, and often a second set of everything, from sheets to dishes. In a time when most families vacationed by loading up the station wagon and staying at motels, having a place of your own to get away wasn't just convenient. It was proof that your hard work had paid off, twice. Wearing a fur coat. Stepping out in a fur coat during the 1960s wasn't just about staying warm, it was about making a statement without saying a word. In an era when most winter wear was practical and plain, fur was reserved for those who lived a rung or two higher on the social ladder. Whether it was full-length mink or a cropped fox jacket, fur carried the weight of status, style, and old-school glamour. These coats didn't just appear, they were carefully selected, often gifted on milestone anniversaries or passed down like heirlooms. I still remember the hush that fell over the room when my cousin's fiancé arrived at Christmas wearing hers. It shimmered under the lights and swayed as she moved, like something out of a Hollywood premiere. The price tag alone could rival a family's annual grocery bill, and keeping it stored, cleaned, and protected was its own kind of investment. Fur in the 60s wasn't just a trend. It was tradition, luxury, and quiet power all sewn into one. And while fashion has changed back then, when a woman walked into a room draped in fur, it told you everything you needed to know. She belonged to a world most people only dreamed of. Hi-fi stereo systems. Only the truly well-off could afford furniture that doubled as a concert hall. In the 1960s, a hi-fi stereo system wasn't just an audio device. It was a full-blown status symbol parked right in the middle of the living room. These machines were massive, built into elegant wooden consoles, sometimes stretching 6 feet long and polished to a showroom shine. They didn't just play records. They transformed listening into an event. Families would gather around as if tuning into a live performance, whether it was Dean Martin or Dave Brubeck spinning on the turntable. I remember my neighbor's dad showing off his Macintosh amp like it was a prized muscle car. The controls looked like something off a spaceship, and no kid was allowed within arm's reach. Buying one of these systems cost a small fortune, not to mention the growing vinyl collection you needed to go with it. While most families settled for small tabletop radios, those with hi-fis were clearly a cut above. The sound was rich, warm, and immersive, and so was the impression it left. If you had a hi-fi system in the 60s, it meant you didn't just enjoy music. You had the money to make it sound perfect. Two-story house. How do you spot the fancy house on the block in 1965? Easy, the one with stairs. In a decade dominated by low-slung ranch-style homes, the two-story house stood tall, literally and figuratively. It was more than just extra square footage. It was a quiet, confident flex. Those extra steps told neighbors you had a little more money, a little more space, and maybe a little more style than the average Joe. Inside, the layout often included more bedrooms for growing families, sometimes even a den or a formal dining room that only got used on Thanksgiving. And in some cases, an intercom system on the wall that made everyone feel like they were living in the future. I still remember visiting a classmate whose upstairs had its own bathroom and a bonus room for toys. It felt like visiting a small hotel. Having a second story meant separation. Adults downstairs, kids upstairs, and a whole new sense of privacy. But more than anything, it meant your family had options. At a time when most folks measured success in square feet and stairs, a two-story home wasn't just where you lived, it was a symbol of how far you'd come. If you enjoyed this video, tap that like button, subscribe, and don't forget the bell so you're first in line for the next memory lane stroll. TV Guide subscription. Before streaming, DVRs, or even VCRs, the most glamorous way to know what was on TV next week came printed on glossy paper and stacked neatly by the checkout aisle. In the 1960s, picking up a fresh copy of TV Guide wasn't just about planning your week of shows, it was a subtle nod to modern living. While many households relied on the daily newspaper for bare-bones listings, those who splurged on TV Guide were making a quiet statement. They had a few extra cents to spend, and they cared about more than just what was on Channel 3. This pocket-sized magazine packed far more than programming grids. It came alive with colorful photos, interviews with television stars, and sneak peeks into upcoming episodes. It brought Hollywood into the living room and made the small screen feel like a big deal. I remember flipping through it on Saturday mornings, circling must-watch specials with a red pen while sipping Tang in my pajamas. In a time when media access was limited and tightly scheduled, TV Guide gave families a sense of control and even a touch of luxury. Owning it wasn't just about watching TV. It was about belonging to the moment. So many little things once filled our days with wonder, now fading into memory. Which of these treasures do you miss the most? Share your thoughts below. And if this trip down memory lane warmed your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you won't miss what's next.